Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wisdom Tradition Podcast. This is Alex Sakin. In today's episode, I'm going to be playing a selection of clips that I've extracted from different podcast interviews and news videos that I've seen over the past 6 to 9 months. And I'm going to play these for you, and then I'm going to comment on them. And the general theme of these clips are orbiting around the topics of my recent book, The Coming World Nation, that's available now on Amazon. So without further ado, I want to jump into the first clip that we're going to be discussing today. This is from a podcast between Tim Dillon and Steve Bannon. And Steve Bannon is a well-known conservative commentator. And he, in this conversation, is going to talk about an aspect of the American governance structure that he calls the administrative state. And he also relates it to the deep state. So this clip is helpful for shedding some light on a topic that I discuss a lot in my book, which is the relationship between the overt government and the deep state. And the deep state is the aspect of governance in America that is responsible for running the empire, the global empire. And the overt government runs the nation state. And the deep state infiltrates the overt government in a lot of ways in order to direct it towards its larger imperial purposes. And the power center of the deep state is the military-industrial complex. It's the financial system, the banks, it's the corporatocracy. These are all aspects of our society that wield a lot of power, have a lot of wealth and influence, but they don't fall under the regulatory framework or the governance framework of the Constitution. The official overt government, it wasn't designed to manage this complex socio-technical apparatus that has emerged over the past 150 years. And the official launch of this deep state apparatus, where the seeds were set for it in the Gilded Age, and then the official launch came in the early 20th century, particularly with the founding of the Federal Reserve. And that's then set the stage for a number of other moves to be made. So the corporations, the banks, and the strategic planners within the military-industrial complex are not accountable to democratic processes. So without further ado, let's hear from Steve Bannon. He's going to be describing the deep state and the administrative state and how they interact with each other.
We have a fourth branch of government that's not in the Constitution. That's a permanent government. And they don't care if Trump's passing through or AOC or Bernie Sanders are passing through. They run the deal like they're going to run. And here's what it is. When you take over the government, when you win, you get 4,000 people. You have 4,000. In the government, you have about 2.5 or 3 million civilians. You have about 2.5 million to 3 million military. So let's say 5 to 6 million there. Plus you have contractors. Another at executive level, another 5 million. So it makes sense. You have about 10 million people that run this apparatus that cost $6.5 to $7 trillion a year to run, or it transfers money, but it costs a huge amount of money to run. Plus it oversees, I don't know, 60 or 70 trillion dollars of assets, right? All the land, all the oil, everything that we control. That apparatus is so out of control that in order to get down to a sustainable model where we're going to actually get close to a balanced budget, it's got to be deconstructed. And if you're ever to get to the deep state, which is the aspects of the Pentagon,
intelligence community,
you basically have the CIA, you have aspects of the DNI crowd, which is 17 separate intelligence. NSA has got the guy, they can look into your phones, they know everything that's going on, everything. Then you've got the Justice Department with aspects of that, and you got DHS with ATF and others. You got the FBI. You have elements of the Defense Department like DIA. That is the deep state. And what I say is it's like the Praetorian Guard in the Roman Empire. They are actually so powerful now that they can decide, like the Praetorian Guard is, who's the emperor and who's not. This is why they turfed out Trump, and they basically plugged in Biden.
Would you agree with this? Somebody who's smart described this as a parallel command structure that is existing outside of the executive branch, where the president is not read into certain intelligence. He's lied to about troop levels in Syria and things like that. They're conducting business with countries outside of the purview of the White House. And somebody called this a parallel command structure.
Only difference I would make, you're 100% correct, so it's not parallel. It is the command structure. When you sit there and get a briefing from these people, they will look you in the eye and lie to you. The deep state is like kudzu, and it's run by the CIA. The CIA controls behind the scenes.
And the CIA is run by the billionaires.
The CIA reports to, first off, an elite class of Americans, very Ivy League. When I talk about the credential class, the traditional control of the CIA has been kind of the Ivy League. Yeah, Harvard, Yale, Harvard Law School, yes, Princeton. A little bit of that's changed, but not the mentality. The very mentality is that
Cold War liberalism.
They are the guardians of this republic.
That's right.
And you have these politicians, whether they're clowns like Bill Clinton or neophytes like Obama or dangerous individuals like Trump, they can wander in and out, but they are the guardians of the republic. America's become a hegemon because of them. You've had Bush, you've had Obama, and now you got us. Why has it never changed? And the reason it never changes that the neoliberal neocons have an apparatus. That apparatus is the deep state.
All right, so in this next clip, we're going to hear from Elon Musk, who was on the Joe Rogan podcast. This is several months ago, back in the sort of prime period when the DOGE thing was going on. And he's going to talk about how DOGE, which was the Department of Government Efficiency, if you recall, and this was a new agency or new entity that was created under the Trump administration that was spearheaded by Elon Musk and involved a lot of AI engineers and computer engineers. And they designed a software that could go in and audit the finances of large government databases. So they could analyze the spending habits, which was a task that was previously not possible or realistic for auditors to get into and analyze. And one of the things that this DOGE group uncovered, that in addition to the structure that Steve Bannon was talking about with these government agencies and bureaucrats and the administrative state and the CIA and that aspect of what we call the deep state, there was another aspect that was revealed that has to do with nonprofits, a vast ecosystem of nonprofit organizations, and that these were deployed to accomplish various goals on behalf of the deep state, on behalf of the American empire. And one of the benefits of using and cloaking this activity through nonprofits is that it basically disguises accountability and it kind of puts a nice face on some of these initiatives. In a lot of cases, these nonprofits basically are fraudulently laundering money. It's an avenue through which a lot of money can be disappeared into other covert departments and deep state activities. So this dynamic is important to understand, and I think it's very encouraging that it's getting so much attention now, and Elon Musk has some interesting things to say about it in this conversation with Joe Rogan.
The whole NGO thing is a nightmare, and it's a misnomer because if you have a government-funded, non-governmental organization, you're simply a government-funded organization. It's an oxymoron.
Right. It's a loophole.
Yes. The government-funded NGOs are a way to do things that would be illegal if they were the government, but are somehow made legal if it's sent to a nonprofit. But these nonprofits are then used to, people cash out these nonprofits. They become very wealthy through nonprofits. They pay themselves enormous sums through these nonprofits.
It's so insane. That's been going on for so long.
It's a gigantic scam, like one of the biggest, maybe the biggest scam ever.
And how many NGOs?
I think there's a total number of NGOs, probably millions, but in terms of large NGOs, tens of thousands. I mean, it's a hack to the system where someone can get an NGO stood up for a fairly small amount of money. Like George Soros was really good at this. Like George Soros is like a system hacker. Like he figured out how to hack the system. He's a genius at arbitrage. These days, he's pretty old, but a genius at arbitrage. So he figured out that you could leverage a small amount of money to create a nonprofit, then lobby the politicians to send a ton of money to that nonprofit so you can take what might be a $10 million donation to a nonprofit to create a nonprofit and leverage that into $1 billion NGO. A nonprofit is a weird word. It's just a non-governmental organization. And then the government continues to fund that every year. And it'll have a nice sounding name, like the Institute for Peace or something like that. But really, it's a graft machine.
And what are their
And-
requirements with that money? What do they have
It's
to
often
do?
just really no requirements at all.
So they just get grants and the government just assumes that they're doing good work.
I think a lot of people in the government know that they're not doing good work, but it's a giant graft machine.
But surely
people online are like unpacking this.
Right. It almost seems fake. Like when you're seeing how we were covering this article that said 55,000 Democrat NGOs were discovered that had been contributing to campaigns and moving things around and pushing propaganda, and they were all connected, and they found it through AI. That you have to go through steps and steps to figure out where the money's coming from. Oh, it's all funneling down to this group, and this group does that. And yeah, it's a giant propaganda machine, a giant regime change machine.
Yes.
This next clip's going to follow on what they were just talking about there at the end of the conversation, which is how the NGO ecosystem can be deployed to accomplish a variety of goals on behalf of the empire. And these include regime change operations such as the Color Revolution, which took place across the Middle East and Eastern Europe around 2010. And you could also look at the same apparatus having been put to work in more recent events taking place in America, such as the Black Lives Matter protests and riots of 2020 and 2021, and the current immigration crisis and the border crisis, particularly during the Biden administration. That whole pipeline could not have been set up without a vast network of NGOs. So those are two examples. But anyway, in this clip, we're going to hear from Mike Benz, and he's going to offer his analysis of how this NGO network is used to shape the world system in a variety of ways. And then Eric Weinstein's going to follow up on that.
There really is a sort of USAID Truman Show that much of the world lives in. Many people found out for the first time this week that 90% of media in Ukraine is funded by USAID. Many people are just now finding out the extent of U.S. media organizations that are funded by USAID. They're finding out the reach of it in everything from the unions to social media censorship to pandemic and gain of function research to strange ties even to things like terrorism and the drug trade. These institutions that everyone thought were private and independent being corrupted by USAID's $44 billion odd a year budget.
Fascinating to hear that. Dave Rubin said the USAID story is way bigger than most people realize. It's not that they funded Politico and New York Times, etc., but that the articles in those publications were used as sources all over CNN, NBC News, etc., to further push their agenda. This is how they laundered the lies, the narrative, as he puts it. And that certainly will be the belief of skeptical people here, won't it? It'll be, hang on, taxpayer money was being directly pumped, millions of it, to media organizations here and in other countries, and was then being used by those media organizations to put out whatever narrative suited them. So effectively, the taxpayer is funding whatever narrative that media entity wants them or wants to put out.
Yeah, it's way worse than anything either of those gentlemen are saying. I don't really know how to talk about it. It's interesting. I didn't know you were going to play that clip. When Israel was commenting in the wake of its pager and walkie-talkie attacks about what the intelligence community actually is, they gave an interview to CBS making the following statement. We make like Truman Show. Everything is controlled by us behind the scene. In their experience, everything is normal. Everything was 100% kosher, including businessmen, marketing, engineers, showroom, everything. Shell companies over shell companies to affect the supply chain to our favor. We create a pretend world. We are a global production company. We write the screenplay. We're the directors, we're the producers, we're the main actors, and the world is our stage. This is how the IC, the intelligence community worldwide, sees itself as this thing that sits atop normal civil society. And in so doing, it presents us a world that is simply untrue. And it's untrue at many levels. It's untrue scientifically. You talk about taxpayer money. That's really how Elon is going to track what this network is and how it functions. If you go after the money, and then you're going to end up going after, once you do that, you're going to go after the data. So what he's really going to do is he's going to get access to the data, and he's going to figure out, as you cut things off, what stops functioning. No one quite knows, that I know, how the New York Times is wired to Harvard University is wired to the Brookings Institution. And as such, it's very strange when you see a spontaneous consensus, because people don't in general come to consensus. They have very interesting different points of view. That's what makes humanity interesting. These large consensus positions are effectively all orchestrated. And that is essentially how government has functioned. Effectively, we live in a fabricated world in which we agree that we won't ask too many questions. And that's what all the concern is about, are you a conspiracy theorist? It's surely you're not going to go poking around in the back of house of the United States of America, are you?
The next clip I'm going to show is going to talk about the financing behind this complicated system and how it's very difficult to figure out what the true financial structure is of the U.S. government because it is really kept secret, kept off the books. And so I have another clip from Elon Musk's conversation with Joe Rogan where he's going to talk about how this financial architecture behind particularly the nonprofit program, but just also the government in general, how it is designed to be opaque. And it's designed to basically block any outside inquiry into its inner dynamics. And the DOGE team with their unique AI software were finally able to put some structure over this, but that kind of fizzled out, that effort. I mean, it did some good things, but it fizzled out because it was really not going to be allowed to go into the Federal Reserve or the Department of Defense or any of the places where the top secret classified stuff is located. So we're going to hear from Musk here coming up. But before we get into that, we're going to hear a short clip from the Jesse Michaels podcast. This is going to be Richard Dolan talking. He's a UFO scholar who I cited in my book, The Coming World Nation. And here he's going to be discussing Catherine Austin Fitts, who's another person I've talked about on this channel before and who I cited in the book. And she's going to talk about her experience working within the government, how she, as the head of the Housing and Urban Development, couldn't get access to the finances of the organization she was legally in charge of governing. Some underlying deep state structure is organizing the financing, and you can't get it unless you're part of that structure. So the overt government can't get access to its own financing details because that financing is being funneled into all sorts of off-the-books and illegal black projects. So we're going to hear this short clip first from Jesse Michaels' podcast, and then we're going to jump into Elon Musk and Joe Rogan.
I've known Catherine Austin Fitts for many years. Absolutely admire her work. She's a brilliant financial expert, you could say. She served with the first George Bush senior administration back in the late 80s, early 90s as Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. She told a really of a story. It should be funny, but it's actually really tragic. She said, when I went into HUD, I said, I want to look at the accounting. I want to look at all the books. And they said, no, you're not authorized to see that. She says, the hell, I'm not authorized to see that. So she finally got her way, and she said, what happened when they brought in the financial records? She said, the old library carts with all the books on them. She said they wheeled in one after another, filled, stacked with papers, organized, disorganized, and she says God could not pull this apart. She said you'd need the greatest accountants in the world to undo this god-awful mess. And she concluded, like, this whole system is designed so that it is impossible to audit.
The fundamental weakness in the government is that the various government databases, they don't talk to each other, or they talk to each other very poorly, in a very limited way. The way the system gets exploited is by taking advantage of the poor communication between the various databases in the government. To give you an example of what's happening, say, Treasury, the main payments computer is called PAM, Payment Accounts Master Database or something like that, but everyone calls it PAM. That's responsible for almost $5 trillion of payments a year, roughly $1 billion an hour. And when we came there, we're looking at this PAM, and it's like you could put a payment through with no payment categorization code and no description on the payment, like basically untraceable blank checks. This is the kind of thing that if it was done as a public company, the company would be immediately delisted and the executive team would be thrown in prison. But this is just normal at the government. So we said, okay, our recommendation to the Treasury and the Federal Reserve is we need to make the payment categorization codes mandatory, not optional, and there needs to be an explanation. We're not judging the quality of the explanation, but there should be some explanation for what this payment is for above nothing.
In this next clip, we're going to continue on this theme of exploring the hidden financial structure of the U.S. empire, and we're going to look at this idea that this non-transparent financial accounting structure actually conceals something that's meant to be hidden. So it's not incompetence that created the system that Elon Musk was describing, but rather that was created to conceal an underground black projects ecosystem. And so here in this clip, we're going to hear from Stephen Greer, who was on InfoWars, talking about how the DOGE stuff is really only scratching the surface because there's this giant structure underneath it that is the recipient of these trillions of dollars of missing money.
If we're going to talk about DOGE for a moment, the low-hanging fruit there are the $8 to $12 trillion that have been embezzled out of the U.S. Treasury that have gone into illegal super black projects. The $60 billion they found so far isn't the tip of an iceberg. Right under our noses in the United States, there is mass embezzlement of federal funds, not just out of DOD and CIA, but other departments and agencies that go into operations dealing with UAPs that no one in Congress knows about except a few people who are corrupt and on the payroll of that organization. And certainly the administration doesn't have access to. So I think Mr. Musk has a big task ahead of him that he doesn't quite yet know about. And it's going to involve penetrating those illegal projects right under our noses where we're talking big money, not a few billion. We're talking hundreds of billions and trillions in the aggregate that have gone into illegal projects. The crown jewel of this, what they call the deep state, is the UAP, UFO-related programs. Why? Because it's the top technology in the world. Surveillance, energy, propulsion. And technology wins. So
That's about energy.
And it's about energy because the global energy system is a globalist entity. In the United States, although we have a lot of energy, the reason we're so dependent on other places is that's by design. And it's to keep everyone dependent on a system instead of everyone being liberated and free to have quote unquote free energy. I'll tell you right now, there's the chairman of a major US corporation, a household name in America, said emphatically, we have had the ability to give everyone on the planet free energy for quote decades. Now what does that mean? It means that if you look at how one of these UFOs is moving, most of the ones you see that have been released from the Pentagon, like the Tic Tac, those are from the Lockheed Skunk Works. The triangular ones, most of those are actually Northrop Grumman and Raytheons.
Okay, after this last clip from Stephen Greer, we're able to see the full architecture of the U.S. empire in its three main categories. There's the overt nation state, which is the constitutional democracy. That's the United States of America. Atop of that, we have the deep state, which is a public-private apparatus that is not accountable to the democratic processes of the overt government, but instead manages a global empire, and it has private control over the global economy through the network of central banks, which are rooted in the Federal Reserve System. So that's the middle section of this three-tiered structure. The top section is the entity I call a technocratic superstate, and that's what Dr. Greer was just describing here. This is the source of the secrecy and compartmentalization that permeates our government, and it's also the recipient of all these missing trillions of funds. So you see the three tiers, and now as you see these three levels, you can really appreciate the role that secrecy and compartmentalization play in driving the behavioral dynamics of the world system, and particularly the American empire. There's like a schizophrenic quality because its psychology is so compartmentalized. Its understanding of reality is so compartmentalized. The whole system is designed to maintain secrecy. And so what we're left with is this very complicated system that is really the worst outcome that we could have. But it makes sense that we would have this because of the planetary cycle, the critical phase that it's entering into, this death rebirth phase. So in this next clip, we're going to hear from Alex Jones of InfoWars, and he's going to be really highlighting the themes that are associated with this particular moment in time that we're in, where we have this complicated structure of empire that, because it's secrecy and compartmentalization, this is the perfect breeding ground for the collective shadow to emerge and to manifest. And this takes the form of this really extractive and very ugly imperial apparatus. and there's some really ugliness that exists there. And psychologically, it's the equivalent of these shadow complexes. And one thing I appreciate about Alex Jones is that his career is really dedicated to rooting those out and exposing them. And so in this clip, he's going to give a kind of tour de force monologue that covers a lot of areas of this shadow complex. And I really appreciate the way he manifests it in this very passionate way. And that's an important part of this process that we're going in through, this death rebirth process, to face this shadow. So this clip is about the consequences of secrecy and compartmentalization. The consequence is the empowerment of this shadow structure.
I want to just state something here for the record. The federal government at the top has been hijacked and is prosecuting war against the very existence of the United States, and is persecuting anybody that is a common sense, loyal American and not a criminal. And just, you cannot state that enough. And the public is starting to realize how much trouble we're in, but unless there is a full revelation that this is a hijacked, stolen election that's now trying to cement its dictatorship of this corporate governmental bureaucracy, we're not going to be able to stop the globalist. But if we just realize it's a consortium of banks, international, focused through BlackRock, their spokesperson is Klaus Schwab, their medical officer is Bill Gates, their global government instrument is the UN and NATO, and that everything, the wokeism, the transgenderism, the anti-family propaganda, the fentanyl, the human trafficking, the dissolved borders, the countless new wars, the inflation, the national debt up at $37 trillion, all of this is America being positioned to be collapsed into a giant world government, not where we lift up the third world, but where we collapse the first world in. And this is being prosecuted. And the conductor of the symphony is Larry Fink. And then he's got his main instruments out there who play their tunes, but he creates, and his controllers and the consortiums create the ESG global government policy. And so everything in the unified corporations, almost every Fortune 500 company, I'd say 99% of them, there might be 5 or 6 they don't control, is literally prosecuting a war against you. But I don't intend to be a victim of this. I intend to identify what's happening. And so we understand that all the terrible things unfolding, they are the progenitors, they are the pushers, they are the amplifiers, they are the people creating most of the crises and then bragging that other crises that come along, they exacerbate those to keep us under what I call a global government crisis management system, where they go out and start the fight, start the wars, accelerate the problems so they can offer the solution, them having more power and control over our lives. The Hegelian dialectic of create problem, create the solution that then gives you more power and takes humanity in the direction you want to go. And again, it's a war on sovereignty, a war on citizens, and a system to put us into most debt as possible and have us as confused with racial division and fighting with each other. So we never know it's King Charles and Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab and Tedros and these criminals. And the whole Epstein thing is the tip of the iceberg. That's just a window into their larger sick world. The UN, thousands of articles and reports, giants, child kidnapping, rape gangs, snuff films, NATO, Interpol. It's just a crew of murdering, child molesting, narcotics trafficking, warmongering devil worshippers. Just admit who's in charge. Satan.
So again, in that clip, Alex Jones was giving a wide spectrum analysis of the way the collective shadow is manifesting through our governance structure at this point in time. So archetypally, when he says that, like, who's in charge, it's Satan, you know, as a philosopher, there's an element of truth in that, insofar as you understand that Satan is not an entity, but Satan is one of these ways that an archetype can be expressed. It's like the shadow side of an archetype. And so if there's the Christ archetype on one hand, the shadow of that would be Satan. But Satan is not an independent entity. It's the negative aspect of the archetype. And so that's what's manifesting through this complicated structure of empire due to these dynamics, primarily of secrecy and compartmentalization, because that destroys the self-regulating feedback that a system normally has in order to correct itself. And that's necessary for evolution to take place. Well, because that feedback is broken down, that self-regulation is not happening, and so you're getting these entrenched sicknesses emerging. It's the same thing that happens in the body when the flows start to break down within the energy networks of the body. They set the ground for all types of illnesses to set in and then tear away at the fabric of the organism. So that happens collectively in the exact same way. An example of how this archetype of Satan, quote unquote, can manifest, you just look at our medical system. And so in this next clip, we're going to hear from RFK Jr. He was on the Tucker Carlson podcast a while back, and he made this point about how the perverse structure of the medical system, how it actually is incentivized to perpetuate sickness. And so a society that the governance institutions perpetuate illness and sickness within the population, you could say archetypally that's a satanic thing. But again, the philosopher is more advanced than just theology. Theology thinks that Satan is like an entity that has moved in. Whereas in philosophy, you're understanding this is the negative polarity of an archetype. And so that creates this dynamic, this perverse dynamic where the type of situation that RFK Jr. is talking about here, how that can persist.
There is nothing more profitable in our society today than a sick child, because all of these entities are making money on them. The insurance companies, the hospitals, the medical cartel, the pharmaceutical companies have lifetime annuities. And the earlier that kid is sick, they don't want to kill him. They want them sick for the rest of their lives. And we have now a whole generation. When my uncle was president, 6% of Americans had chronic disease. Today it's 60%. When my uncle was president, do you know what the annual cost of treating chronic disease was in this country? Zero. There weren't even any drugs invented for it. Zero. Today, it's about $4.3 trillion.
When your uncle was president...
And none of it is necessary.
What was the autism rate in 1960? Do we know?
In 1960, the autism rate, there's about 4 or 5 studies. And the highest rate, say about 1 in 2,500, 1 in 1,500, 1 in 2,500, 1 in 10,000. Oh, so that it was somewhere between 1 in 1,500 and 1 in 10,000. Today, it's 1 in every 34 kids, according to CDC. And in some states, like California, I think maybe Utah and New Jersey, 1 in 22. 1 in 22 kids. And, you know, these kids should be healthy. These kids should be our highest performing kids. And they instead have this extraordinary disability that's going to keep them dependent. If you're full-blown autism, which is nonverbal, non-toilet trained, head banging, stimming, toe walking, these are kids that will never throw a baseball. They'll never graduate high school. They'll never go out and take a girl on a date. They'll never use the toilet alone. They'll never write a play. They'll never write a poem. They'll never vote.
Never have children.
Never pay taxes.
So that just seems like such an emergency.
And for me, like if I could save one of these kids, it would be worth giving my life for it.
In the next section of clips, we're going to be delving into the topic of technocracy. Simply put, it means a scientific and technologically managed society. Its economics aren't based on money and markets, but rather on energy, measurement and distribution and regulation of energy throughout the global system. That becomes the basis of economic transactions and activity. So it's a energy-based paradigm, and its governing body is scientific and technological in nature. The shift to technocracy, once you know to look for it, you can see it everywhere. But in my analysis of it, it's happening across 2 fronts, or there's 2 stages to it. The initial stage is being driven by the new techno-capitalist class, meaning the capitalists that are in charge of the digital economy. Whereas the previous network of oligarchs in America, the American empire, that power structure was rooted on things like oil or steel. And finance is obviously the traditional structure, but the companies that run and control the AI digital economy, that's a new oligarchical power structure that's emerging. And their thinking is still trapped in the legacy institutions of materialism and oligarchy and feudalism. It's still infused within their structure, but there's also a weird techno-utopian dynamic that's there. Like Elon Musk's grand vision is to go off planet, for example. It's a very materialistic kind of objective, like physical beings moving from one physical world to another physical world. That is indicative of a state of psychology. And one of the traditional infatuations of the oligarchy, and it's very symptomatic of its psychology, is an obsession with population control and eugenics. There is evidence that there are elements or pockets of this deep state apparatus that seem to be dedicated to something like population control. Then there's a psychiatry wing of it into mind control. Again, these are all faces of the collective shadow. There's operating in this technical aspect of the deep state. There is a question of whether some actors in this group are working towards the deconstruction of civilization, or to create an apocalypse or Armageddon, or to bring one about, to bring about a collapse. In this upcoming clip, Alex Jones is going to be referencing this aspect of the collective shadow and its relationship to this archetype of destruction.
I want to show you something. This is the working UN treaty, and you need to understand what's in this. This takes full control of everything in your life. Transportation, the borders, your military. Our military is under UN control, under a treaty with the UN. Trump pulled out of it. Biden re-signed it. That's what this is. So if you think the crisis of the open borders is bad, this is the UN over everything. And this is the White House, the UN, the House of Commons. This is all the different governments signing on to it. They've got the bills in Congress to sign on to it, World Health Organization, Pandemic Treaty implementation, and more research scientists and more research groups and more universities and more organizations are now piling on, because you can't hide the elephant in the room that there was no real excess death in 2020, and there was massive death everywhere the shots were given. And then we have the databases in places like New Zealand directly tying it to the people dying were the ones taking the shots. The shots start, and the worst death rate ever seen since statistics starts in all these countries, not in the countries that didn't take the shots. Didn't happen in Russia. Didn't happen in other countries that said, no, thank you. No increased mortality there. No spikes off the chart. But understand, they killed even more people with the IMF World Bank rules over the third world nations they control with debt, telling them for over 2 years, you can't work at a farm or at a ranch or at a factory. And that's why they then got organized to come here, because they were starving to death. Then the UN says it's global warming making them all come here. Or, 80-something million over the last 4 years starved to death because of COVID. No, because of COVID restrictions. So we're talking about 17 to 20-something million, depending on whose numbers you look at, dead from the shots. That's big. That's premeditated. But they knew damn well when they shut down those countries where people on average pay half their paycheck for just food, that when you shut them down and they can't produce food, they're going to die. And when you create global inflation, and now they're spending 80% of their little paycheck on food, they're going to starve to death. They are turning the electricity off, turning the pipelines off, turning the fertilizer off. They're turning the human food off. They're turning the machines' food off. They're turning the plants' food off. They're administratively turning the infrastructure of civilization off. Now you know why I'm panicking. There's 8 billion people. And the UN says, because of global warming, brace for unrest and war and billions coming into your countries. It's them opening the borders, starving them, not letting them have jobs, and then bringing them here. It's all them doing it. It's part of the replacement migration plan. This is modern war.
Coming up next, I have a series of clips I'm going to be playing that are going to continue this theme of trying to understand how this movement to technocracy is interfacing with a larger planetary transformation ritual that's taking place. And these upcoming clips are going to focus specifically on the technological advances that are taking place. And the thing I want you to keep in mind as you listen to these is to think about how much pressure this is putting on existing institutions. So at some point, we are headed for a dramatic transformation in our governance system. And like I say in my book, this transformation process is being driven towards global government, and it's also being driven in the direction of technocracy and in the revelation of a new paradigm of science and technology. And AI is one of the key technologies that are going to be used in the implementation of this new technocratic energy-based system. And so in this first clip that we're going to hear is from InfoWars. It's a collage of quotes by various speakers that are involved in implementing technocracy. And then after that, we're going to hear from Eric Schmidt, who's this former CEO of Google. And this is a clip from this past year. There's two of them. And he's going to be discussing how rapidly the AI revolution is blossoming and how much the pace of change is just exponentially increasing, and how we're not talking about a decade. We're talking about a few years before it reaches a point where it's going to have no choice but to begin to rapidly transform our governance structure. So we're looking at transformation in governance taking place rapidly. And then the final clip is going to be Mark Andreessen, who's a VC, Silicon Valley VC, and he's going to be just making a statement that in his talks with the government, the plan is to ultimately consolidate the AI companies into a single governance framework. And presumably this will be happening at an international scale, and this will be one of the components of the forthcoming system of global government that's we're moving into. And so I'll be back with a few parting words after that, but let's jump into this clip.
From the White House in the office of the President of the United States, we present an address by Dwight D. Eisenhower.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. We must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
And we'll be faced with equally consequential decisions in the 21st century. Can a microscopic tag be implanted in a person's body to track his every movement? There's actual discussion about that. You will rule on that, mark my words, before your tenure is over. Can brain scans be used to determine whether a person is inclined toward criminality or violent behavior? You will rule on that.
If you have enough data on a person, especially biometric data, and if you have enough computing power, you can understand that person better than the person understands himself or herself. And then you can control this person, manipulate them, and make decisions for them.
Can you imagine that in 10 years when we are sitting here, we have an implant in our brains, and I can immediately feel, because you all will have implants.
People will literally be part of a network. All the bodies, all the brains would be connected together to a network, and you won't be able to survive if you're disconnected from the net.
With AI taking over many of the unskilled and possibly some of the skilled activities, then there will be people for whom seems to be society. It won't have much use for these people.
We need to accept that there will be some pain in the process.
I think we're going to have to think about a recalibration of a whole range of human rights that are playing out online.
Individual carbon footprint tracker.
Many of these things will be built directly into our bodies.
That's a hostile corporate takeover of your body and a digital surveillance censorship dictatorship.
President Eisenhower tried to warn us about this years ago. The hostile takeover of a scientific,
technological elite.
They provide much more powerful intelligence for decision making.
Can a microscopic tag be implanted in a person's body to track his every movement? You will rule on that.
The next phase is the surveillance going under our skin.
Now that we've cracked the code of life, it will not take much longer before we can start to play God.
The new powers that we are gaining now, especially the powers of biotechnology and artificial intelligence, are really going to transform us into gods.
It's a total, complete AI takeover of every facet of human life, like Harari and others have been saying.
Given all the technological developments, it might be feasible, even easy, to support people, even if they don't work. To give them a universal basic income, to give them enough food, enough medicine, and so forth. The big question is meaning. What will they do all day? And one of the answers is that they will just play computer games all day, virtual reality games. They will spend more and more time playing virtual reality games that will give them much more excitement and emotional engagement than anything in the real world outside.
But what I see is a huge disruption. That is, before we get to the world that Yuval envisaged in his description of the future, there's going to be a complete destabilization of the human condition and of human societies. This is not going to happen quietly.
So is this a particularly tense moment, or is it just the bias that I have because I've not been through these things before? Is there something different?
You're looking. I can't even believe the question. You're looking at the end, man. This is the beginning. This is a slow rollout of a completely different world. We've all been in a completely artificially stagnant bubble for decades. My entire life up until now has been in a bubble. Remember all the talk about the singularity? Like Ray Kurzweil, we're heading to the singularity. What is the singularity going to be like? You're in it. This is now.
Do you really think this is the start of the end?
I don't know if you're watching what I'm watching. Look at the mess that's going on in Gaza. Russia is nuclear. Israel is presumably nuclear. Pakistan and India are nuclear. The US is nuclear. Iran is almost nuclear. China is pissed off. Oh, and look at the UK in turmoil, to say nothing of France. This is not going to go well. And by the way, look at how much is happening with AI.
We believe, as an industry, that in the next 1 year, the vast majority of programmers will be replaced by AI programmers. We also believe that within 1 year, you will have graduate-level mathematicians that are at the tippy top of graduate math programs. That's 1 year. What happens in 2 years? The evidence and the claims from the research groups in OpenAI and Anthropic and so forth is that they're now somewhere around 10 or 20% of the code that they're developing in their research programs is being generated by the computer. That's called recursive self-improvement, is the technical term. So what happens when this thing starts to scale? A lot. One way to say this is that within 3 to 5 years, we'll have what is called general intelligence, AGI, which can be defined as a system that is as smart as the smartest mathematician, physicist, or artist, writer, thinker, politician. I call this, by the way, the San Francisco consensus, because everyone who believes this is in San Francisco. In the next year or two, this foundation is being locked in, and we're not going to stop it. It gets much more interesting after that. Because remember, the computers are now doing self-improvement. They're learning how to plan, and they don't have to listen to us anymore. We call that superintelligence, or ASI, artificial superintelligence. And this is the theory that there will be computers that are smarter than the sum of humans. The San Francisco consensus is this occurs within 6 years, just based on scaling. Now, in order to pull this off, you have to have an enormous amount of power. This path is not understood in our society. There's no language for what happens with the arrival of this. This is happening faster than our society, our democracy, our laws will address. And there's lots of implications. That's why it's underhyped. People do not understand what happens when you have intelligence at this level, which is largely free.
The AI revolution is underhyped, and here's why. The arrival of this new intelligence will profoundly change our country and the world in ways we cannot fully understand. And none of us, including myself and frankly anyone in this room, is prepared for the implications of this. You think of AI as ChatGPT, But what it really is a reasoning and planning system that we've never seen before.
What did you hear in those meetings?
AI is a technology basically that the government is going to completely control. This is not going to be a startup thing. They actually said flat out to us, don't do AI startups. Like, don't fund AI startups. It's not something that we're going to allow to happen. They're not going to be allowed to exist. There's no point. They basically said AI is going to be a game of 2 or 3 big companies working closely with the government, and we're going to basically wrap them in a government cocoon. We're going to protect them from competition. We're going to control them, and we're going to dictate what they do. And then I said, I don't understand how you're going to lock this down so much, because the math for AI is like out there and it's being taught everywhere. And they literally said during the Cold War, we classified entire areas of physics and took them out of the research community, and like entire branches of physics basically went dark and didn't proceed. And that if we decide we need to, we're going to do the same thing to the math underneath AI.
Wow.
Okay, that's it for today's episode. The objective here was to demonstrate the value of the framework that I put forward in the book, because I think it uniquely allows you to make sense of this very chaotic time period that we're living through. So I hope this episode was helpful. If you haven't checked out the book, please do. And I will catch you guys in a new episode coming probably in a week or so. But thanks for tuning in. Cheers.